Good morning, YouTube. Warbles on a lot here. Sunday, the 20th of September. Getting ready for Outsiders, hopefully followed by First Dog on the Moon.
Time now for Outsiders. I'm Barry Cassidy, and you're not.
He is indeed. We are not. In fact, we are. Ian Hankey, a former Howard government advisor, now runs a political consultancy. Gail Morgan joins you too. She's an associate partner in Newgate Communications. She's a former economic development advisor to Simon Crean. As opposition leader, former industry advisor to Kim Carr when he was Shadow Minister for Industry. Bernard Keane, politics editor for Crikey, joins us as well. Morning, all.
Good morning.
Has everybody had an intriguing week?
Yes, it's been one of those.
I think the intriguing went on before.
Nicely pointed out. There seems to be there. On that point, Bernard, what's your sense of the long tail here? How far back were the knives being polished, do you think?
Well, I was told on Monday that Turnbull had the numbers for some time, possibly weeks, but against that, there are a number of stories doing the rounds, and of course, Julie Bishop's role was also very important, and that didn't factor in until Monday. So I think Malcolm Turnbull has obviously been in a strong position for some time, but whether he had the numbers to get over the line, a week out, as maybe some have suggested, perhaps we'll never know. That's one of the mysteries of these events. Is people tell you all sorts of things when you're trying to count the numbers about.
There's only one thing we know, Bernard, and that is that Mr. Turnbull got 55 votes and Mr. Abbott got 44, I think it was. So they're the only figures that matter. What it was right beforehand is neither here nor there now. That's history. It's yesterday's news.
And Ian, there's a lot of love in the room.
With any of these sort of changes, there will always be a little bit of a tension convention post-event. And now I suspect, and I can understand that angst.
Yep.
I've got to say, it's not unexpected. I think, though, that perhaps over the next 3 weeks, as MPs and senators go back out into the electorate, start talking to people and get a feel for what the actual broader public think and feel, maybe that will temper some of that angst and tension that's going on. But that's only, we'll only know in a few weeks' time.
Because Gail, that public sentiment around Turnbull is pretty impressively positive. His preferred PM numbers this week were up into the 60s of percent.
Absolutely. Look, I think there's two things going on. I think one is that there was a bit of a collective sigh of relief around the country. I think people were looking for change, and I think Malcolm Turnbull has consistently rated well as a leader for a long time in the polls, and I think people have been waiting to see it happen, and now we've just got to see how he performs.
My only concern with Mr. Turnbull has got quite good preferred PM ratings. I mean, it is extraordinary. Now they'll come off obviously over a period of time.
May have something to do with the alternative too, of course.
That's true. But one of the things that concerns me always with anybody that has these huge ratings is that part of the reason for that is that people have invested their own views and their own hopes and their own aspirations into Mr. Turnbull. Now, inevitably, some of these aspirations that have been invested in Mr. Turnbull cannot be met. And so, once that sort of sinks through a little bit, we'll get back to a more realistic position. Now, we'll have to see what it is. I mean, we won't know. I expect Mr. Turnbull will get a bump in the polls over a period of time, and then it'll settle down and we've got a real contest.
And there's that feeling, Bernard, too, of, there's two feelings, I guess, if you read the commentary over the weekend in particular, that this either represents the fundamental dysfunction of our system or the ruling of a line under a period of incompetence and tumultuous change and a new sort of sense of certainty. Where do you fall on that divide?
Well, look, the fingers crossed Malcolm Turnbull will be, a prime minister. I mean, there's kind of a feeling we just haven't had a prime minister. since John Howard left the stage. I mean, Kevin Rudd was, seemed to kind of fill the role for a while, but then it all went haywire. Julia Gillard was sort of cruel from the outset, and anyway, she came to the job too early, and Tony Abbott never made the transition from opposition leader. The country just needs a prime minister to get in and govern the joint for a while in a way that a lot of us who even may have disliked John Howard, now look back fondly to before 2007. So if Turnbull faces destabilisation and white-handing, well, that will show that we haven't left that kind of cycle of the one that we've been trapped in since 2000 since 2010. Does it represent some sort of fundamental dysfunction? Look, I think it's partly there are structural changes going on in politics that have played a significant role. I think the changes in the media are significant, and even John Howard, who's not exactly the most social media aware human being. I think
seen his Instagram account.
Well, indeed. I think he sort of would put his finger on it rightly, but it's also been the personnel. And in Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard and Tony Abbott, and particularly Rudd and Abbott, we have had two problematic political personalities ascended to the top job for, partly through luck, partly through their own talent, but who never really made the job their own in a way that Australians, I think, expect prime ministers to.
I want to come back to that media change and Tony Abbott's take on that as well. But let's hear first from Turnbull, and then here he is hitting the ground as a fully formed prime ministerial presence.
We need a different style of leadership. We need a style of leadership that explains those challenges and opportunities, explains the challenges and how to seize the opportunities. A style of leadership that respects the people's intelligence, that explains these complex issues, and then sets out the course of action we believe we should take and makes a case for it. We need advocacy, not slogans. We need to respect the intelligence of the Australian people.
And even there, Gail Morgan, being entirely imperial, he can't resist sticking a knife into the opponent. But I guess, Gail, he's right. That sense of respect would be a good starting point.
Absolutely. But what you actually just heard there is Malcolm's greatest strength. Our Prime Minister can actually can actually communicate. When I was watching that press conference, I sat there thinking he's actually having a conversation with us as opposed to lecturing or as opposed to running slogans. And if he can keep that up, I think he'll be Prime Minister for a long time.
It's quite interesting. I think Mr. Turnbull in that presser has created his own high bars now, which he will have to live up to. And I think his style was quite comfortable and relaxed, particularly when he's in opposition. Whether or not he can maintain that now that he is in prime minister, now that he is a prime minister, and has to start making some hard, real decisions that have hard, real impacts on people's life every day. Whether or not the media gives him the same latitude that he once had, and that you always get in your first couple of weeks, will be interesting to see. I think you'll find that ability to have a conversation will be a little bit more constrained than what it was when he was in opposition, purely because of the function of being prime minister.
And we've seen that effect on
many leaders.
Apparently personable people like Tony Abbott, like Julia Gillard.
I'm not saying he won't be able to do it. I mean, these are some of the very interesting things that we're going to see unfold over the next period of time.
Bernard, down by your right hand there, I think you'll find a Bible.
Oh, look! It's only the 2009-10 budget paper. Not something to swear upon, I think.
Which is a reference, of course, to the interesting conversation between Ray Hadley and Scott Morrison during the week. But Bernard, there's an interesting discombobulation amongst the vocal right with the decline of Abbott and the ascendancy of Turnbull. That there's a group of pundits and influential ones previously who perhaps now not going to have quite the influence that they have enjoyed in recent times.
Well, I mean, I think one of the core differences between Tony Abbott and John Howard, and it's a difference that was enormously influential in Tony Abbott's fate, is that John Howard always understood that the right-wing shock jocks, the Andrew Bolts of the world, they might be in his corner, but they weren't necessarily the best source of political advice. Their idea of political advice was always go harder, go more aggressively, smash the left. You know, it's one giant culture war, and you've got to always be leading the fray. John Howard understood you've got to lead from the centre, and in the success of his prime ministership, certainly until his last term, was that he understood that he couldn't take the advice of the Alan Joneses and Ray Hadleys and Andrew Bolts of the world necessarily, because it wasn't always in his best political interests. Tony Abbott, I don't think, ever understood that. Tony Abbott sort of saw them as not merely cheerleaders, but good sources of tactical advice, and he shared their worldview. And I think he embraced their style and their counsel too readily for his own good, and that's why. I think that's one of the reasons why he failed to make the transition from an enormously successful opposition leader to a prime minister.
Bernard, I was quite cheered to hear Scott Morrison take on Ray Hadley the other day, and I think it's long overdue myself. And I would hope to see the same thing happen to Alan Jones, because I tend to concur with you that these people are extraordinarily vocal. Often they're ignorant of their actual subject matter, but it's more about their narcissistic egos than about real policy, and it's about entertainment. And I don't think they should be allowed to dominate the political conversation quite so much. Sure, have their views, I don't mind that, but I don't think any politician should necessarily acquiesce to them just because of their egos.
Influence, they need to be listened to. But I mean, the interesting thing though, Gail Morgan, is the way in which perhaps that view is represented within the Liberal and National parties as well. And that's the great tension for Turnbull here, is it not? Is to, and I think what people want outside of politics too is for our politics to stop being internal, to stop being about internal tension, to be actually a bit more about us.
Well, that's the Prime Minister's greatest challenge now, isn't it? It's actually bringing the party together. Part of that will start today with the announcement of the ministry. He's going to have to get the balance right. And as Bernard said, he's going to have to start leading from the centre and bringing his colleagues along with him, and then, of course, bringing Australians along with him.
You know, it's interesting when people start talking about leading from the centre and so on. One of the things that is going to occur is that Malcolm Turnbull is not going to change any of the policies that we've introduced over the past 2 years or more. He is not going to suddenly do any changes about, say, issues on gay marriage or climate change or so on. And he is actually going to be running with much the same policies of what we've had over the past 2 years. So it's not changing anything from the right or whatever. These are perceptions that people have built in about Abbott rather than about our policies. So nothing is fundamentally going to change. The exposition of these policies and how we're going in the direction we are going in might. But there's this nonsense about suddenly coming back to the centre. There's actually probably not a very accurate analysis of where we really are. So I think we've got to be a bit more sensible about saying going from the right to the centre and so on.
Which, Bernard, we might see, and just a quick last point on the reshuffle announced today, which is going to be a pretty difficult balancing act.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, balance between loyalists and Abbott support, Turnbull loyalists, Abbott supporters, youth and experience, states. I mean, all those factors will come into play. Turnbull's kept it very tight, so we'll all find out in due course. No one seems to have.
We're a buzz with anticipation. All we revealed in the fullness of time.
Okay, they're signing out, so we'll start a new video.